On forums and social media in the early 2010s, people whispered an obsessive key word: Bayou Butcher Jerky. Legend had it that in Bayou Corn County, a small parish nestled on the outskirts of Baton Rouge, there once existed a devil in human form. It was rumored that he had brutally murdered dozens of teenagers and young men, then dismembered their bodies like a skilled butcher. The best cuts of muscle, he would carefully fillet, take home to cure in large plastic drums, and then mix with a bit of real alligator jerky. Afterwards, he would calmly push a wheelbarrow out to the local farmer's market to sell to innocent people. In the dead of night, villagers living nearby would often hear the squeak of a mysterious man's wheelbarrow echoing through the small lanes. And then the next morning, at the bustling market, they would see him again. A grim-faced man displaying a stall of strange meat. He would call out, "Get your specialty jerky. Tender and sweeter than beef. Come on folks, buy some and try it." The curious who bought and tried it had mixed reviews. Some praised its tenderness and delicious flavor. Others complained it was tough and chewy, with an indescribable sour taste. No one could have ever suspected that the food they had just put in their mouths could have been made from the body of a human being. That urban legend, though unverified, still sowed an invisible fear. Until one day, a truth even more horrific than the rumors was brought to light. At 4 a.m. on May 9, 2012, Earl Thibodeau, a sanitation worker, began his day as usual. His job was to collect trash from the public dumpsters around the central market in Bayou Corn County. While cleaning a large dumpster in an alley behind the market, where vendors often discarded entrails and other byproducts, Mr. Thibodeau noticed a very suspicious black duffel bag. The bag was very heavy, and a dark red fluid was leaking from it, emitting an incredibly foul, fishy odor, a smell distinctly different from that of ordinary animal blood. Curious, Mr. Thibodeau used his steel hook to pry open the bag zipper. He shone his old flashlight inside, and then he let out a blood-curdling scream, scrambling backward and collapsing onto the ground. Inside the duffel bag was not animal offal, but a severed human leg, along with an upper torso that had been stripped of nearly all its flesh. The Bayou Corn County Sheriff's Office received the call shortly after. A homicide case involving such savage methods and the public disposal of a body sent shockwaves through the community. A special task force, led directly by the veteran investigator Sheriff Brody Cormier, was formed that very morning. At the scene, forensic experts began their work. They confirmed the body parts belonged to a young male, but what was most terrifying was the way the cuts had been made. The medical examiner told Sheriff Cormier this was not the work of an amateur. The cuts on the bone are clean, sharp. The perpetrator filleted the flesh from the bone with extreme professionalism, just like a butcher with years of experience. He did not just kill someone, he processed the victim like livestock. This information, combined with the fact that the victim's large muscle groups were missing, made Sheriff Cormier suddenly remember something. A gruesome rumor he had once heard. Bayou Butcher Jerky. Could that urban legend actually be true? Sheriff Cormier immediately linked this case to the string of mysterious disappearances of teenagers and young men that had occurred in Bayou Corn County for years without resolution. He had a strong feeling that this was not an isolated murder, this was just the tip of the iceberg. Perhaps this was the first time the devil had made a mistake, leaving behind a part of the body he had not fully disposed of. The investigation immediately focused on the county market, the most likely place where the killer operated or sold his product. Deputies were ordered to go undercover, blending into the crowd of merchants and shoppers, listening and gathering information. They quickly narrowed their focus to two individuals who sold strange meats and wild game at the market. The first was a large, heavy-set man nicknamed Big Jim Boudreaux. Big Jim's stall was one of the largest in the market, specializing in wild game, from venison and wild boar to other meats of unknown origin. Big Jim was known as a local tough guy with complicated ties to the criminal element, often intimidating and bullying other vendors. He had all the tools of a butcher and certainly had the ruthlessness to commit such a crime. The second person was his complete opposite. It was a grim, quiet old man named Silas Croft. He did not have a permanent stall, only pushing an old, creaky wheelbarrow that held a small wooden box. Every day, he sold only one type of meat, which he called specialty ostrich jerky. He was a man of few words, he would sell if asked, but otherwise remained silent, his face an emotionless mask. Compared to the intimidating Big Jim, Silas Croft looked gentle and harmless. The task force ran background checks on both, and the results were surprising. Big Jim, despite his reputation as a thug, only had a few minor priors for disorderly conduct. In contrast, Silas Croft, the harmless-looking old man, had an unbelievably dark past, a prior conviction for murder, for which he had served 19 years in prison. The case now had two paths. One was the aggressive-looking thug with a large stall that could easily conceal any shady activities. The other was an old man who had killed before and was now selling a strange, unidentified meat. After consideration, Sheriff Cormier decided to follow the more logical path. Dismembering and disposing of a large number of bodies required a good cover. Big Jim's large stall was a far more perfect cover than Silas Croft's rickety wheelbarrow. Furthermore, the disappearances had been going on for years, while Silas Croft had only recently started selling his strange meat. It was very possible he was just a copycat, exploiting the rumor to sell some unknown type of meat. Sheriff Cormier ordered them to focus on Big Jim first. He has a large stall, complex connections. It is very likely he is using it as a front to hide other things. We need to find out where the wild game he sells really comes from. The investigation had its first suspect. A surveillance team began to closely monitor all of Big Jim's activities. But they had no idea that while they were focusing their attention on the loudly roaring paper tiger, the real devil was still silently pushing his wheelbarrow to the market every day, selling off the remains of his unfortunate victims. Sheriff Cormier's order had officially pointed the spear of the investigation at suspect number 1, Big Jim Boudreaux, the thuggish merchant with the largest wild game stall in the Bayou Corn County market. The task force's theory at this point was that Big Jim was running a criminal organization, using his business as a front for illegal activities, which could potentially include the series of mass disappearances. The discovery of a professionally dismembered body part right near the market only strengthened this theory. Perhaps the victims had been kidnapped and murdered for their assets or, worse, killed for their organs, with the well-connected Big Jim being the mastermind. A comprehensive secret surveillance operation on Big Jim was launched. The best undercover deputies were sent in, posing as shoppers and gamblers, frequenting the places Big Jim was known to visit to gather intelligence. His stall was indeed highly suspicious. His supply of wild game was abundant and diverse, ranging from common types like wild boar and deer to rare, protected species. Every day, several small, unmarked trucks would deliver goods to him at the crack of dawn, a time when few people were paying attention. In addition to his market business, Big Jim ran an illegal poker game behind his house. This place attracted many unsavory characters and was a breeding ground for conflicts and debt. The deputies also discovered that among the 17 missing youths, at least 3 had been in debt to Big Jim. The motive of killing to settle a debt was entirely plausible. After nearly a week of surveillance and gathering sufficient evidence of illegal gambling and the sale of contraband, Sheriff Cormier decided it was time to shake the tree. A surprise raid on Big Jim's poker game was executed. Dozens of gamblers were arrested, along with a large amount of cash and various crude weapons. Big Jim, as the ringleader, was also taken into custody for investigation. In the interrogation room, facing Sheriff Cormier, Big Jim was extremely defiant. He admitted to organizing the gambling and illegally selling wild game but vehemently denied any involvement in the disappearances. He said, his voice full of challenge, "Look, Sheriff, I run an illegal operation, I admit it. But I am not a killer. I am just a butcher and a loan shark. I need my debtors alive to pay me back. What good does killing them do me?" He answered smoothly, logically. But Sheriff Cormier knew that the most cunning criminals always have the most reasonable explanations. "We have information that at least 3 of the missing young men were in debt to you. How do you explain that?" Coincidence? Big Jim shrugged. In this part of Bayou Corn, what young buck is not into gambling and debt? If they do not owe me, they owe someone else. Does every one of my debtors who goes missing mean I killed them? The interrogation lasted for hours but yielded no results. Big Jim was incredibly stubborn, admitting only to the crimes that were already obvious. Regarding the disappearances, he would not say a word. Meanwhile, another team was ordered to search Big Jim's entire stall and private residence. They hoped to find some clue, some piece of evidence that could link him to the victims. The search was thorough. They found many types of rare wild game hidden in large freezers and ledgers recording gambling debts. But there was absolutely no trace related to the missing victims, no clothes, no IDs, and most importantly, No trace of human DNA. The forensics team also took samples of all the unidentified meats Big Jim sold for analysis. The results later confirmed that they were all animal meat. There was no trace of human flesh. The investigation into Big Jim seemed to have hit another dead end. He might be a criminal, but it seemed he was not the monster they were looking for. Just as the task force was feeling stumped, another disappearance occurred. The victim this time was a young man named Ethan Cole, 18, a construction worker. He vanished after leaving an internet cafe one evening. This event was like a slap in the face to the task force, showing that the real killer was still at large and continuing his crimes with defiance. Sheriff Cormier was furious. He realized he had gone down the wrong path. Focusing on Big Jim had wasted precious time while the real devil continued his hunt. He ordered Big Jim's release, though he would still be prosecuted for his other crimes, and shifted the entire focus of the investigation to the remaining suspect. The one they had initially overlooked because of his seemingly harmless appearance, the old man selling ostrich jerky, Silas Croft. The investigation into Silas Croft restarted from scratch, but this time with a heightened sense of urgency and determination. The deputies did not just look into his background, they delved into the smallest details of his daily life. They knew Silas Croft had a history of murder, but that crime had happened a long time ago. After his release from prison, he lived an almost reclusive life. How did he make a living? Where did the ostrich jerky he sold really come from? Why did he choose to live alone in such a secluded place? A surveillance team was assigned to monitor Silas Croft 24/7. They set up an observation post in a concealed location from which they could watch his entire old, dilapidated house and small garden. For the first few days, the deputies did not notice anything too unusual. Silas Croft had a monotonous daily routine. Early in the morning, he would push his creaky wheelbarrow to the market. He did not solicit customers or talk much. He sold if asked. When he ran out of stock, he would silently push his wheelbarrow home. In the afternoon, he often wandered through the park, playing chess with other old men. At night, he would lock his doors and stay inside. But then, the deputies began to notice strange behaviors. Late at night, around 2 or 3 a.m., Silas Croft would push his wheelbarrow out of his house again. But this time, the barrow was empty. He would push the empty wheelbarrow through the deserted alleys and disappear into the darkness for hours. When he returned, his wheelbarrow would sometimes be carrying large, heavy sacks. What was he doing at that hour? What was he bringing home? Another important detail was gathered by the field investigation team. They revisited Silas Croft's chess partners. One old man recounted that Silas was a very good chess player but had a strange quirk. He never talked about his family or his past but was very boastful about his health. The old man recalled that he always said that even though he was nearly 70, he was stronger than any young man. He even bragged that he had a secret to staying healthy, which was eating a special kind of meat. He said that meat boosted his vitality, made him strong as an ox. He even invited me to his house to try it once, but I found him too weird, so I declined. Special meat. This detail immediately sent a chill down the investigators' spines. It brought back the urban legend of the Bayou Butcher. The suspicion against Silas Croft grew stronger. He had a history of murder, engaged in mysterious nighttime activities, and talked about a special meat. Everything was pointing to a horrifying truth, but it was all still just suspicion. The task force could not just barge into his house without concrete evidence. They needed something more solid, something that could directly connect Silas Croft to the missing victims. Sheriff Cormier decided on an incredibly bold and dangerous plan. He said in a meeting, "We cannot wait any longer. He will not stop. There will be more victims. We have to set a trap. We need someone who can get close to him, go into that devil's den, and find the evidence." The plan was laid out. They would use a young deputy, who resembled the victims, to pose as a homeless, unemployed youth to approach and befriend Silas Croft over a game of chess. It was a suicide mission. If discovered, the deputy would surely become the next victim. But it was their only chance to break the case. A young deputy named Caleb Landry, only 23 years old, bravely volunteered for the assignment. The final chess game with the devil was about to begin. The plan to set the trap was in motion. It was a high-stakes chess match where a young officer's life was wagered to unmask the devil. Deputy Caleb Landry was the brave young man assigned to this mission. He was a local, knew the area well, and had a boyish, friendly appearance, a perfect cover for his role as a disillusioned, unemployed wanderer. The task force equipped him with miniaturized audio and video recording devices and an emergency alert button. A special operations team, including snipers, was secretly positioned at key locations around the town square, ready to intervene if the worst-case scenario unfolded. The approach began. Every day, Caleb Landry was present at the park, sitting alone at one of the stone chess tables. He did not proactively engage with Silas Croft, he just sat there, setting up a game, playing against himself, occasionally sighing with a look of sadness and frustration on his face. He knew that with an old fox like Silas Croft, any overt friendliness would arouse suspicion. He had to be patient and let the prey come to him. For the first few days, Silas Croft paid no attention to the young man's presence. He would quietly come, play a few games with his old friends, and then silently leave. But Caleb's consistent presence and troubled expression eventually caught his eye. On the fourth day, after finishing a game, Silas Croft did not leave immediately. He walked over to Caleb's chess table, stood there for a moment, and then asked in a raspy voice, "What's the fun in playing chess alone, young man?" Caleb looked up, feigning surprise. "Oh, hello, sir. I am just playing to pass the time. You do not look like you're from around here. Came here looking for work?" Silas Croft pressed. This was the opening. Caleb began his performance. He told a carefully crafted story. He had come to the Baton Rouge area from a remote part of the state looking for work, only to be scammed out of all his money and documents. Now, he was too ashamed to go home and face his family and was living on the streets. The tragic story, combined with Caleb's sincere appearance, seemed to have an effect. "Well then, let's have a game for fun," Silas Croft said, sitting down opposite him. The fateful chess match began. Caleb was a decent player, but he deliberately made weak moves to let Silas Croft easily win. The victory on the chessboard seemed to make the killer open up a bit. And so, for the next several days, they became an odd pair of chess buddies, a former murderer and a young undercover deputy. They talked about all sorts of things. Caleb always maintained his role as a pitiful young man, while Silas Croft acted the part of an experienced elder, offering advice. No one could have guessed that behind that seemingly friendly exterior, a devil was silently sizing up his prey. Then, late one afternoon, when the park was nearly empty, Silas Croft extended the deadly invitation. He asked, "It's getting dark. You got a place to go?" "No, sir. I will probably just find a park bench for the night," Caleb replied, his voice full of sadness. Silas Croft looked at him for a long moment, then said, "My house is nearby. I live alone. If you do not mind, you can come over for a hot meal. We can figure things out tomorrow." The trap had been sprung. The fish had taken the bait. Though his heart was pounding, Caleb managed to look overjoyed. "Really, sir? That would be great. Thank you so much." He secretly pressed the coded alert device in his pocket, sending a signal to the task force that the target was making his move. The walk from the park to Silas Croft's house was the longest walk of Caleb Landry's life. He followed the killer down the very path that 17 previous victims might have walked. The narrow dirt road was flanked by tall, overgrown weeds. The fading evening light filtered through the leaves, casting eerie shadows on the ground. Caleb felt as if he were walking into the jaws of death, each step heavy with dread. He knew his colleagues were secretly tailing them from a safe distance, but inside the devil's den, he would be completely on his own. Silas Croft's house came into view, an old, dilapidated shack swallowed by a neglected garden. As soon as he stepped into the yard, Caleb was hit by an indescribable stench, a rancid smell of rotting meat and dried blood mixed together. "My place is a bit of a mess. Hope you do not mind," Silas Croft said, opening a decaying wooden door. The inside of the house was even more horrific. Trash and old, broken furniture were piled everywhere. Caleb tried to act natural, but a sense of high alert was screaming inside him. Silas Croft invited him to sit on an old chair and then went into the kitchen. "You sit here. I will cook up something simple. We can have a drink." Caleb sat there, his eyes darting around the room, trying to take in every detail. He saw several large sacks piled in a corner, and on a small table, there were a few metal plates with what looked like bones drying on them. A moment later, Silas Croft came out of the kitchen holding 2 glasses of moonshine. He placed one in front of Caleb. He said, "Drink up, it'll warm you." Caleb knew this drink was very likely drugged. He had to refuse without raising suspicion. "Oh, no thank you, sir. I have a liver condition. The doctor told me not to drink." Silas Croft's brow furrowed. His eyes suddenly turned cold, the friendly facade from before vanishing. "A strong young man like you cannot drink? 1 glass will not kill you." Seeing his prey was wary, the devil decided to drop the act. He put the glass down and silently stood up, walking towards the corner of the room. Caleb felt a wave of mortal danger wash over him. His hand secretly moved to the final alert button. Silas Croft turned back around. This time, he was not holding a glass of moonshine. He was holding a length of thick rope. He snarled, "You're not some unemployed kid. Who are you?" With that, he lunged. Instantly, Caleb slammed the emergency alert button. He used all his strength to flip the wooden table towards Silas Croft to block him and then bolted for the door. But it was too late. The door had been locked by Silas Croft earlier. Just as Silas was about to grab Caleb, a deafening crack echoed through the house. The rickety wooden door was kicked open by the tactical team. Dozens of heavily armed officers stormed in from all directions. "Freeze! Sheriff's office! You're under arrest, Croft!" Seeing the police, Silas Croft roared like a wild beast. He swung the rope, fighting back with insane fury. But against an overwhelming and well-equipped force, all his resistance was futile. In less than a minute, the serial killer was finally tackled and completely subdued. Immediately after Silas Croft was arrested and escorted away, an emergency search of his entire house and garden began. What they found inside surpassed their most horrific imaginings. Silas Croft's house was nothing short of a dump, but amid the chaos were irrefutable pieces of evidence. In his bedroom, they found 7 large sacks filled with the clothes and shoes of young men. Nearby, a wooden chest and another suitcase were filled with IDs, wallets, and cell phones from numerous people. Among them were the personal effects of the first victim. But the most horrifying discovery was yet to come. As they entered the kitchen, a stench even more potent and vile assaulted their nostrils. In the middle of the filthy kitchen, they found a platform built of bricks. When they removed the surface bricks, 5 large, blue plastic drums were revealed. A brave young officer stepped forward, using an iron bar to pry open the lid of one of the drums. As the lid came off, the rancid smell of curing meat and decomposition billowed out, forcing everyone to step back. The officer shone his flashlight inside. The beam illuminated a murky, greyish liquid, probably brine. And floating in that liquid was a severed, pale white human arm. The entire investigation team stood in stunned silence. The urban legend of the brining vats had finally been proven true. The gates of hell had been opened right in the middle of Silas Croft's filthy kitchen. The sight of a human arm floating in the blue plastic drum left even the most seasoned deputy stunned and numb. The air in the house grew thick, a deathly silence descending, broken only by ragged breaths and stifled gags. Sheriff Brody Cormier, though his own stomach was churning, maintained a stone-faced expression. He knew their work had only just begun. He ordered, his voice hoarse, "Check all the remaining drums." The forensic officers, after composing themselves, began their grisly task. They opened the lids of the 4 remaining plastic drums one by one, and with each lid removed, a new level of hell was revealed. Inside the 5 drums were countless human body parts, submerged in a murky brine solution. Most horrifically, the parts had been meticulously sorted, much like a butcher sorts the cuts of an animal. One drum contained muscle and large slabs of flesh that had been filleted from bone. Another held limbs, arms, and legs stacked on top of each other. Yet another was filled with organs. But the evil of the demon Silas Croft did not end there. The search was expanded to the entire property. West of the brick platform, the police found an earthenware jar. Inside, it was filled with human intestines. And on the kitchen wall, a piece of human skin was held in place with duct tape. A tattoo of a rose was still clearly visible on the skin. The search continued in the vegetable garden behind the house. In a dry well, they found more bone fragments and victims' clothing. But the most terrible discovery was in the garden itself. As investigators began to dig, they realized the soil was not normal. It was a horrific mixture of dirt, crushed bone fragments, and decomposing human tissue. An officer involved in the search later recounted with a haunted look, "If you had sifted all the soil in that garden, all that would be left underneath is bones." The search and excavation lasted for more than 20 days. The police found an unimaginable quantity of human remains and tissue. The brutality and gore of the scene were far beyond what a normal person could endure. During this time, Silas Croft was officially charged with premeditated murder. In the interrogation room, faced with a mountain of irrefutable evidence, with video images from his own crime scene displayed before him, he remained terrifyingly calm. When Sheriff Cormier asked him how many people he had killed in total, he answered nonchalantly, "I do not really remember." He then added that all the people who had gone missing on that road were killed by him. As for the specific number, he told the police to go back and count how many sets of victims' clothing they had found, and then they would know. The investigators were aghast. They could not believe that the entire horrific crime spree, stretching over many years, was carried out by Silas Croft alone. Finally, knowing there was no escape, Silas Croft agreed to a full confession. His statement was devoid of remorse, devoid of emotion, as cold as a demon's daily work report. He laid bare his entire process of hunting, killing, and profiting from human bodies. He confessed that after getting out of prison, loneliness and a hatred for society had turned him into a monster. He began to target young men, those he considered vulnerable and less likely to be missed. He said in a monotone, "They were like lost little lambs. I was just helping them find a new path." He recounted a typical case. The victim was a young man who had come to the area from out of town looking for work. He had seen the boy sitting alone in the park for several days. He approached him, playing the part of a kind old man, asking about his situation, and then invited him home for a meal. The young man, hungry and desperate, happily accepted without a shred of suspicion. Once the prey was in his den, the devil's true face was revealed. He would give the victim a glass of moonshine laced with sleeping pills. When the victim was unconscious, he would tie him up tightly. What followed was an act of pure savagery. He would not kill the victim right away. He would beat and torture them to satisfy his sadistic urges. Finally, he would use a rope to strangle them to death. After the murder, his real work began. He would drag the body into the kitchen, where the tools of a butcher were already prepared: cleavers, boning knives, a saw, and the plastic drums. He explained matter-of-factly, "The hardest part is you have to be fast. If you wait too long, the meat is no longer fresh." He began the dismemberment process with chilling professionalism. He would hang the body upside down to bleed it out. Then, he would fillet all the muscle from the thighs, back, and arms. These were the best, most tender parts. He would cut them into large slabs and soak them in the prepared brine drums. He said this helped preserve the meat longer and gave it a richer flavor. He would also remove the organs, clean them, and soak them in a separate jar. The bones and remaining scraps of meat he would put into an industrial meat grinder, pulverize them, and then take them to the back garden to mix with the soil as fertilizer. After the butchering was done, he would begin the business phase. He would take the brined human flesh, slice it into smaller pieces, and then mix it with a bit of ostrich or beef jerky he had bought at the market. He explained, "You have to mix it. First, to make the taste more authentic. Second, to cut costs. Real ostrich jerky is very expensive. Every day, he would push his wheelbarrow to the market to sell this horrific concoction. He even said that business was quite good. Many people had bought it and even returned as repeat customers, praising how delicious it was. He used the money earned from selling human flesh to support himself and continue his daily hobby of playing chess." Silas Croft's confession closed one of the most savage and gruesome serial murder cases in American history. With the irrefutable evidence and his confession, the Superior Court of Bayou Corn County later sentenced the defendant, Silas Croft, to the maximum penalty for the crime of premeditated murder, death. On May 10, 2013, the monster was executed, ending his sinful life. The crimes of Silas Croft are, of course, abominable, but the negligence of local law enforcement was the fertile ground that allowed his evil to flourish. For many years, a monster with 2 prior murder convictions was able to kill with impunity right under the noses of the police. Dozens of young lives vanished one by one, but all their families received was indifference. It was the apathy of those in charge that allowed the tragedy to drag on without end. Only after the case broke open did a number of local officials face severe disciplinary action. The devil Silas Croft ultimately paid the price, but the lives that were lost can never be brought back. And finally, there is Silas Croft himself. Until his final moments, he never revealed a clear motive for his crimes. He did not kill for money or for personal revenge. He killed simply because he could. He was the embodiment of pure evil, a primordial evil that needs no reason. Was he created by a violent family environment? Did 19 years in prison turn him into a monster? Or was he simply born a devil? That question will likely never be answered. The horrific case in Bayou Corn will forever remain a scar, a costly lesson about societal indifference and the inexplicable, terrifying darkness that can reside in the human soul.